All right, here we go. In this video, I'm going to teach you guys how I built this 38 foot wide by 11 foot tall door for my hangar. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to build one for your shop or hangar. Let's get into it. Before I show you how I built this door, let's go over the pros and cons on why I think this is the best DIY door you can build for your hangar or shop. The first pro, it's easy to build. It's all one piece door. You don't have to mess with hinges, torque tubes, hydraulics. All right, for the second pro, it puts the load of the door directly underneath the header where you want it versus like a bifold or a swing out door. It actually puts a lot of stress on your building by having that door hanging out in front of your building. I've seen actual buildings form cracks in the drywall from the stress of having that door hanging out. It essentially wants to pull that building over. The third pro, there's no latches to unlatch or lock. When you walk in, you don't have to walk to the other side of the door and undo a latch. You just hit a button and it opens. And you hit a button and it closes. For the fourth pro, it's affordable to build. You're using garage door parts like pulleys and cables, which are widely available, so it's just affordable to build. The fifth is you gain almost full head height. Versus like a bifold, you always lose a couple feet. And you don't have to make your building taller to accommodate for the loss that you do if you go with a bifold. And you can make this door as wide as you want without adding a truss. You just add more cables. All right, now on to the cons. They're not terrible, but it is worth mentioning. Some could argue that this door doesn't seal quite as well as a bifold or hydro swing door. There is some truth to that, as those doors do seal quite well. With this style, the top swings in and the bottom swings out. So it's a bit harder to get it to seal, but it can be done, and I'll show you how I went about it. Other con with this style door is cosmetic. Cables are seen hanging on the outside of the door. This could look a bit janky, so I understand why some wouldn't want that. I did run my cables a bit different, so you really don't notice them at all. My friend came up with this idea, and it works really good. I'm gonna get into that later and show you guys how to hide those cables. All right, first thing is, you're gonna need to design your door to your width and height. The top of the door butts up against the top of the header, so that's something you have to design for. That will be where the top seals, and you should have about a ½ inch gap on each side. I went with a 1/4 inch, and it opens and closes just fine, but it is a bit on the tight side. Now, there isn't a lot of math that goes into these doors. It is a rectangle with a few uprights. My width is 38.5 feet wide, so I went with 4 uprights. If you have a narrower or a wider opening, you may need more uprights or fewer. You make the call on what would be best for your door. It's pretty self-explanatory. One thing to consider is the spacing of your last upright to the down pulley, as you'll need enough length to open the door completely. Once you have the design, go get yourself some 16 gauge 2x2 steel tubing. The sticks come in 24 foot lengths, so I was able to have my splice right in the middle. Lay it out, square it up, and start welding. Now, I have seen a few people weld their door in place.
Yeah. I didn't realize my cement on that side dipped down maybe an inch. Before I welded it up, I would have welded it in place.
That's what I was going to do on mine. I was just going to put little blocks. It'll have that natural match to the concrete on the bottom.
But either way works well, on a flat slab or weld it in place. One thing to note is the horizontal tube should be about center, so your door pivots. Some people say it's better to have the top of the door a bit heavier so it wants to lean back. I don't think it really matters one way or another. Just have it close to the center. All right, once you have your one side all welded up, go ahead, grab some friends, help lift it in place, and clamp it to the header. This point is basically how the door will be when it is in its shut position. It's important that you account for the siding width that goes on the outside of the door. Put some pieces of wood or blocks between the header and door that account for this space while you're setting up the door. I've seen this overlooked, and when they go to put the siding on, the door now closes with an angle. All right, at this point, now we're going to weld the support uprights to the uprights. This basically spreads the load where the cables hold the door. Again, this is all 16 gauge 2x2 tubing. Now you're gonna go get garage door pulleys, cut them in half, and weld them to the uprights underneath the span-wise cross tube. You'll want to move them out enough for the cable to clear the thickness of the insulation and siding. Now that we have our uprights and our half-cut pulleys welded on, which I will say my friend just built the door, and he actually cut a 4-inch steel pipe in half, welded it to the side, It is definitely a beefier setup, but every other door that I've seen always does the half cut pulley, and they are still working. So before we go any further, I thought I would just explain how the door generally works. How this door works is super simple. You got 4 uprights and you got 4 cables. The one cable that's on the very far of this upright, that's your main cable. That's one solid cable that goes up the upright and all the way over to your winch. And all the other uprights, those cables attach to that main cable from the farthest upright. It's really that simple. And then on each upright, you have an eye bolt that you can screw in or out to get the tension perfect so the door is perfectly level. It's that simple. Now we're jumping over to the rails. This door has 2 rails. It has a side rail and an upper rail. Everyone usually uses garage door rails. I use garage door rails because the rails really don't have that much load on them. All the load is basically on those cables. The rails are just kind of guiding the door to open in its position. So we're going to first talk about the side rail. It's basically just positioning the door from swinging back and forth when it opens. There isn't really much load on it. The only load that's on the door is when the wind is blowing in its closed position. I installed these plates to take that load, and then also the door can seal up against them. The plate on the bottom is attached to the jamb. The plate on top is actually attached to the door itself, so it seals up against the building. Now I install my rail on the inside of the jamb and the outside of the door. It's just a cleaner install, and I think it just seals a lot nicer. I have seen people install their track actually on the outside. That's one way to do it. I think this is better just because it's cleaner and it seals a lot nicer. The only downfall with how I do it is it's harder to install the wheel, but it's not that bad. When you install the track and this wheel, this is probably the hardest track to install because the door rotates 90 degrees and it kind of shifts. And this is your pivot point right here where this wheel is. So if we're gonna exaggerate this, so we're gonna take this wheel and I'm gonna put it down here. Now the door is pivoting right here from cables. So if I had my wheel here in the track, when it would go up, it would push the door back because the wheel's here and the pivot point's here. So the cables would be at an angle up at the very top. That doesn't work. So you could see I drilled my hole twice and it's literally within a half an inch. And that's because at the top, I didn't want my cables to be binding. All right, now we're gonna jump up to the top rail. This rail basically determines how the door is in its open position, whether the bottom of the door is facing the sky or facing the ground. How that works is if we're gonna drastically change the height of this rail. So if I had moved this rail down, say 2 feet, when it's in its open position, the bottom of the door would be facing the sky. So that determines how level your door is when it's in its open position. I suggest having the bottom of the door a little bit lower, so if it rains, then the water will drain to the outside and not drain in. Again, there isn't much load that's on this rail. It's just kind of pivoting there. If you make the top of your door really heavy, yes, there is more of a load on those wheels, and maybe you'd want a safety thing to where if those wheels broke, it would catch it on something else. Or you could have the bottom of your door heavier, and then it would want to swing up and hit your building. So there's not much load, though, on those if you build it to where the door is a little bit balanced. I do suggest having it a little top heavy or even bottom heavy. That way it's not sitting there and kind of jiggling its way up. Now, I use garage rails because they're perfectly set up for it. You do want your door to go up at least an inch before it starts tilting back. So garage door rails are perfect because they have that 2-inch up and down. Okay, now that we have the rails installed, let's jump up to the header where we're going to install the pulleys for the cables. These need to be mounted directly above the upright and centered above the pulley that was cut in half and welded to the frame. Use a plumb bob for this to figure out where to mount them on the header. I like to mount mine so the cable just goes next to the header, but I have seen some people drill holes through the header and run them that way. Either way seems to work. Once you have the pulleys mounted, you can run your cables. I went with 3/8 cable, which is probably overkill as it's rated for like breaking strength of 14,400 pounds. but that gives me a bit more peace of mind as the door is hanging by them, so I suggest not going too small of diameter of cable.
That's with a little bounce.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that bounce is actually probably increasing it.
So this is where this style of door is quite neat. Basically, you can open this door many different ways, from just your regular 12-volt winch, and you could use a solar panel and battery, to a 120-volt winch. I've even seen it done with a hand crank winch.
Need to find me some more of it.
I went another route, and I wanted to use a simple garage door opener. I wanted to get the smallest one I could get and see if I could open this door with it. My first design actually did work, but I ended up changing it as it seemed like it wasn't that safe, because if the chain broke or the cable broke, the door was going to be coming crashing down. So I bagged that idea. I came up with a new idea that still used a garage door opener, and it worked so good. Now, incorporating a garage door opener to run this door is definitely harder to build and fabricate versus just using a regular winch is way easier. But the benefits you get from using a garage door opener, like being able to hit this button and it opens and closes at its set limits, and it has the safety features of the beams. It has a battery backup, so if the power does go out, still get it open. It senses if it's crushing something and it'll go back up, or vice versa if it's too hard to open. Maybe something's wearing out. The features you get with the garage door opener, I think, are worth it to spend the extra time to incorporate that to open the door. So instead of using the garage door opener to run a winch to open the door, I decided, why don't I just use the garage door opener to move a counterweight that is attached to the cables moving the door up and down. Now, this counterweight needed to weigh as much as the door, and the door calculations, the door weighed around 400 pounds without siding, windows, or insulation. I had a 200-pound counterweight, so I used mechanical advantage of 2 to 1, so the building would be pulling the other 200 pounds. It's opening. I gotta give a shout out to Hyperlite. They sent me these UFO lights. I got 8 of them in here, and I got the 4,000 color versus the 5,000, so they're a little bit on the warmer side. They light this place up like you wouldn't believe. And the best part about it is I can actually dim them, so at night I'm not being blinded. And they were a breeze to install. Basically, I ran an extension cord that had outlets spaced every 5-10 feet, and so all it was is hang the light up and plug it in. I'm going to leave the link to these lights in the description. Thank you, Hyperlite, for sending me these lights. They really are a great light. The best part about it is when I dim them down, I think they use like 7 watts each. So they're super efficient also. All right, let's get back to building the door. All right, now that I have the door perfectly balanced with the counterweight, it's now time to rig up the garage door opener to move that counterweight. As this was a bit of pain as I was working in really tight tolerances, when designing your building and your door, give some space on the side if you can. You can always run the cables outside of the building, as I have seen this done many times before. The garage door opener came with a 9-foot rail, but I needed 11 feet. I went to a garage door opener installer, found some old rail that I could extend mine with. I also had to extend the chain cable. This wasn't that much of a pain to do. Let's see if it stops.
Oh my God, Jonas.
Isn't that cool?
That's awesome.
It like slowly stops.
Yes. Just click again.
Just click again.
Oh my goodness. This is freaking amazing.
Look how smooth it is too. Now that we know our door opens and closes, it's now time to sheet the outside. Put the windows in and just finish it all up. I need to give a shout out to Brick Steel. I use them for the siding and the trim for this door and the whole building. They have been awesome to work with through the building, this hangar, especially Stefan. He's helped me with the design, the mechanical advantage. Now, when designing your door, you want to actually design it to your rib profile, because your ribs are spaced a certain amount. All the doors I've seen, you make sure your cables are laying against the flat and not the ribs when they're going up. Now, I did mine different. I actually had my cables land on the ribs. That way I could hide the cables in the rib, because I had Steve came up with this idea to make a certain trim called a hat trim, where the cable actually lays inside the trim and it kind of hides the cable when the door is in its closed position. It actually works really well. The only downside is trying to line up the siding so those cables perfectly land on a rib. It wasn't that difficult, but it still was a bit of a pain. For the bottom seal, you're going to want to just use regular garage door seals. So you want to install this garage door seal first before you put your siding on, and it has a sticky back. You just stick it to the bottom of the door and it seals out the rain, and it's actually kind of hidden even when it's closed. I went a step further and I cut a noodle in half and I actually taped that to the bottom of the door. The beauty of that is it actually conforms to the concrete, so if you have some low spots and some high spots, it'll fill those gaps. So there's one more thing you got to do to your door that I think is important to do, and that is to secure the bottom of the door and the top of the door, because when the wind blows, it definitely wants to kind of bow the door in, and I've seen it happen, and it probably doesn't really hurt the door, but I like to secure it. I also secure the top because it wants to blow that in too. So the bottom is super easy. You just use some spring-loaded lock pins, and then you drill some holes in the concrete, and those just lock in place. The top of the door is a bit harder to secure, but it can be done with a little fabrication of some angle iron and bolts. The beauty of this door is that it locks itself as it opens and closes. So you don't have to unlock these latches, it automatically does it. So now with the siding and trim and everything on, the door ended up weighing 800 pounds. Now my counterweight was 400 pounds, it's actually 200 pounds. With the mechanical advantage, it basically made it 400 pounds. So I needed to find another 200 pounds to add to my counterweight. I think I found my counterweights. You think it's gonna work? No. A big old chunk of metal.
Metal there.
And this was kind of a pain because I was working in really tight tolerances. I hope so. Give it a good tack.
Come on.
The amount of travel that the counterweight has to go, it hit the floor when the door is at the top. So I couldn't add any more weight to the bottom of the counterweight. My travel was maxed out. I either had to chunk out the concrete to get more travel, or that was it. Because when I designed it and how I put it, it was just so close. So I do suggest giving you a little extra room. All right, guys, hopefully this inspires you to build your own door for your hangar or shop and save a buttload of money. Obviously, it's a lot of work that kind of goes into it. It's not that bad. Most all the work was done in my garage door opener design. And now that you guys know how to do it, it'll be a lot faster if you decide to go that route. But if you decide to use a regular winch, it's way easy. I mean, honestly, I've seen people use a winch without a counterweight. I did use a winch with a counterweight with my door, but come to think about it, it's just taking less strain off the winch. Now you're gonna have a counterweight that's hanging up there. I would just use mechanical advantage and just use a winch. And then you wouldn't even need the pulley that comes down. You could actually mount your winch up top and just do a straight run all the way over. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys on the next video. Bye. My audience right now.
Quiet on the set.
Everyone, quiet on the set.
Loki. Ava.
No one talk. Pretty funny.